By now, the story is well known. Two young couples went out for a late night drive in the abandoned World War II ammunition dump known as the TNT Area, outside of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. On this excursion, they would witness the unimaginable, and their lives would become inexorably linked to the unexplainable. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we are going to be discussing a case that's a little bit more infamous than a lot of the cases that I deal with here on my channel. And that, of course, is the fascinating case of the Scarberry Mallette Mothman Encounter. Now, while not the first sighting of the Mothman, I will say that this is easily the most popularized, perhaps iconic sighting of the thing which was a bunch of things, kind of, which collectively came to be known as the Mothman, of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, of course. And really, this case is what appears to have kicked off a lot of the kind of attention that the later sightings and just general disturbances in the Point Pleasant area in those infamous 13 months between November of 66 and December of 67, this really seemed to kind of kick off a lot of the attention that this phenomenon there kind of achieved. And with good reason. I mean, this case is so dramatic, it feels like a horror movie. You have these young couples out in the middle of the night driving through this abandoned area, and they encounter something out of the ordinary. It's atmospheric, it's evocative, and it is definitely spooky. The evening of November 15th, 1966 was cold and clear. Sometime between 11:30 and midnight, two couples, Linda and Roger Scarberry and Mary and Steve Mallette, all either in their very late teens or very early 20s, were driving through the McClintock Wildlife Station, better known as the TNT area. Due to the fact that during World War II, more than 8,000 acres of the surrounding land was devoted to an ammunition manufacturing facility and grounds. These munitions were then stored in concrete bunkers or igloos, kind of scattered all over the area, and after the war was pretty much abandoned. It became part wildlife area, part landfill. Surprise, surprise, it was actually uncovered in the late 80s that the land was extremely contaminated by hazardous waste. Anyway, the two couples were cruising through the igloo-studded land in the Scarberry's 1957 Chevy. They drove over a slight rise near an abandoned power plant and saw hovering in some bushes two big, bright red eyes, about 2 inches in diameter and 6 inches apart. They saw that these lights or eyes were actually attached to this humanoid-shaped being, about 7 feet tall, with, again, humanoid arms, legs, and large wings, which Linda Scarberry often later compared to, quote, angel wings, spread slightly behind it, kind of to the side, with the tips visible above the shoulders. They said that this thing seemed off balance as it kind of ambled or shambled back behind the corner of the power station. Like it moved in sort of a wobbly fashion, like it couldn't really, again, get its balance. But it disappeared behind the back of the power station. Now, this classic image of the Mothman garnered from these early witness sketches, and not like the really adorable, which I will fully admit, super adorable, very moth-themed Mothmen that you'll see now with, like, the little fuzzy antennae and the moth-like wings. They are adorable, by the way. I love those guys. But anyway, the classic image of the Mothman garnered from early witness sketches often portrays it as having no head or face. Now, again, across the board, sightings of what came to be known as the Mothman really vary. There are reports of more humanoid beings, bird-like beings, the infamous partridge encounter. The disturbance was actually almost mechanical or ufological. However, as far as, again, this classic iconic, the winged being with no head and the big red eyes, when pressed on the apparent headlessness of this infamous sighting, Linda Scarberry told Don Sargent that it wasn't because it didn't have a head or face. It was just that if it did or if it didn't, you couldn't see it because the eyes, as she said, consumed your vision. Very interesting concept, which, of course, we will return to. After watching this bizarre being shamble back behind the corner of the power station, the four simply sat there for a moment stunned, until finally Roger Scarberry took off and they began speeding through the meandering roads that wound their way among the igloos. As soon as they got out onto Route 62, they said that the winged thing was just sitting on a hill, almost as though it was waiting for them. As soon as the headlights landed on the figure, they claimed that it rose straight up into the air without flapping its wings. Roger revved the old Chevy up to 100 miles per hour, and to the horror of all those in the car, this thing kept pace right above the vehicle, casting its shadow over the back windshield. Now, they said that as they neared some lights, the thing dive bombed the vehicle and simply vanished. They thought maybe they were in the clear. At this point, they continued speeding on, and it reappeared over the vehicle on another dark stretch of road, then vanished again as it came near the lights of a local farmer's gate. They said that when it would kind of take off, they could then hear the sound of flapping wings, but that it didn't flap its wings at any other time that it was flying, or be seen to flap its wings either. It was just this sound. The quartet stopped once they were in town and tried to decide what to do, whether or not to go to the police. Eventually, Steve and Roger decided that they wanted to go back and get a better look at whatever this thing was. Although Mary and Linda didn't want to and tried to talk them out of it, eventually all four agreed, and they decided to go on. They began to drive back to where they had spotted this strange winged being. However, as they approached that same farm where the creature had vanished the last time, they apparently lost their nerve and decided to turn back to Point Pleasant. As they did so, they were turning the car, they saw the body of a large dog lying alongside the road, and as soon as their nose was pointing back in the direction of Point Pleasant, the bizarre winged being jumped out of the shadows and over the car once again. Now, this was enough for them to go to the police. The two couples went to Tiny's drive-in and had someone call the cops, then went back, cops and at least one other civilian in tow, to the TNT area. Now, there was some back and forth, kind of collecting people in cars, until finally the whole posse just simply sat in their cars with the doors locked and the lights out for about 15 to 20 minutes, when suddenly they heard something which sounded like, quote, the most terrifying thing in the world, a large mouse. Now, as they heard this noise, a large shadow kind of darted over one of the buildings, and dogs started barking from all over the surrounding area. Deputy Millard Holstead began searching the treetops with a searchlight, though all he saw was a cloud of dust or smoke. Now, as if this terrifying night wasn't enough, all four of the witnesses had later encounters, either seeing the creature again in the days ensuing, or poltergeist phenomena. The Scarberry home began to have bizarre occurrences, such as the sound of a sped up phonograph. The activity became so prevalent that they actually moved to the basement of Linda's parents' home. But unfortunately for them, the activity followed them and actually seemed to escalate. Strange lights moved throughout the house, objects apparently moved by themselves. And one night, Linda even woke to see a strange apparition at the foot of her bed. Now, this bedside apparition will also appear many years later to a guest of the Scarberry home. A month later, Linda claimed that she would see the Mothman again, though for the time being, I want to circle back to her initial experience that fateful night in the TNT area. Now, when she spotted the being, she claimed that she thought it looked like its wing was stuck in a wire and that it was trying to free itself with its hands. Now, she also believed that it was scared of them. And this kind of needy display or feeling of, not necessarily wanting to help, but almost sympathy for this creature was repeated about a month after the initial sighting. Now, in her interview, Linda demarcates this as occurring when they lived on 13th Street, so apparently either in a house or an upstairs room. She said that she looked out the second-story window one cold night and saw the being sitting on the roof near the window with its arms wrapped around its legs and its wings folded around itself. She believed that it was cold and trying to keep warm, and even said that it appeared to be looking in through the window. Her impression was that it was cold and lonely. Now, of course, this is a fascinating case and only a tiny part of the insanely detailed tapestry that is the Mothman phenomenon. However, in and of itself, this is a truly amazing encounter. One of the most important aspects of the Mothman is the eyes. Now, the first thing that the witnesses saw in this case were the eyes, and again, they continue to be arguably the most important part of what the witnesses were actually experiencing. The clarification by Linda Scarberry that the eyes were so hypnotic, not bright, not blinding, but that they drew the vision of the viewer in so much that you couldn't make out the face or head behind it, is a very intriguing distinction. I mean, I really wonder how many other encounters with eyes, or even if we kind of go a step further and say lights, which are referred to as blinding, um, actually refer to this idea that of a force which literally draws the vision of the viewer in. Now, I think again, this kind of ties to the concept of the observed and the observer. Literally, there were no other details to the face, the eyes were so prevalent. Now, this case is iconic for many reasons. Not only does it involve another really bizarre kind of cross-field thing where creatures, UFOs, ghosts, you name it, seem to be able to keep pace no matter how fast someone is going. And in some cases, will even kind of almost appear to play cat and mouse. When the person slows down, the thing slows down. When they speed up, the thing speeds up. And in this case, again, you have this car going 100 miles per hour, and this winged being is just kind of effortlessly, keeping up with it. In addition to that, of course, one of Keel's, so-called favorite haunts of the paranormal, the TNT area is effectively this kind of long abandoned garbage dump. So again, very like just an iconic case. And something interesting about it is that, in my opinion, it kind of shows this inverse narrative of viewers and detail. I've discussed before how it seems that there will kind of be a cloud of ambiguous sightings that solidifies into a close high contact sighting. Almost that the phenomenon solidifies into a harder, more detailed sighting for one person, whereas it's coming from this collection of more ambiguous sightings from multiple people. In this case, it seems that the more detailed sighting of the Scarberries and Mallettes almost diffused as they brought more people to the scene. Now, I think that this concept kind of shows the potential for anomalous experiences to move through this spectrum of subjectivity. In my opinion, just looking at this case, it seems as though Linda Scarberry had the most personalized encounter, with this highly emotional response or perhaps connection to the bizarre being that she was seeing. And then the people around her experienced, again, a highly detailed, though less charged encounter. And then finally, upon bringing others to the encounter, the police, there were still bizarre occurrences such as the shadows and kind of vague figures, but with far less detail. On the topic of subjectivity, too, it's interesting to note that, again, we look at these occurrences and we say, well, maybe it's just some sort of group hallucination, or maybe it's just some subjective occurrence that somehow is shared by multiple people. But when the large shadow moved across the building later in the night, the dogs in the surrounding neighborhoods went berserk. So they did notice something. Again, it's kind of this, forever tipping seesaw of objectivity, subjectivity. Now, in my previous episode on another infamous encounter, the Partridge encounter, I mentioned this connection between Partridge's lost dog Bandit and the dead dog on the side of the road. Now, many others have also drawn this comparison, and who knows? Is it odd that a large dog vanished after a sighting of this strange kind of red lighted thing? And then this large dead dog shows up right near another anomalous encounter with a red eyed thing and then promptly vanishes. The body was not there when they came back with police. Dogs seem to have this kind of odd relationship to the paranormal. And if you look at it symbolically, serving as guides and guardians of the dead and the other world. If you look at this, it almost feels as though this guidepost, this thing at the division between the mundane and extra mundane, in this case at least, is removed or kind of rendered useless. Now, we also have a concept very near and dear to my heart. It was actually this particular sighting of the Mothman that finally kind of put the nail in the coffin to the literal flesh and blood cryptozoology that I had really held dear throughout most of my life. John Keel really kind of pinned the Mothman to the board with this one. Discussing just the fact that with a height of 6 or 7 feet, a wingspan of 10 feet would not be sufficient to let this bizarre humanoid being fly. And in addition to that, you know, it is impossible for a creature, again, not even of that height, but just in general, to be able to take off without flapping its wings, let alone keep up with a car that's going 100 miles per hour down the road. If you combine this with the vast amounts of UFO sightings and poltergeist activity and psychic phenomena going on in the area around Point Pleasant at the time, the concept of the Mothman simply being some unknown flesh and blood animal seems limiting to the nth degree. And so, again, this case will always have that kind of special place in my heart simply because that's what really got me looking into high strangeness. Now, in my opinion, though, for as much as I love the core of this case, the two most intriguing aspects of it, in my opinion, have to do with Linda Scarberry's later encounters and her strong emotional response or maybe attachment to this thing. This case and the ensuing poltergeist phenomenon that the Scarberrys experienced is the paranormal textbook example of a strange creature sighting that then opens up cross-field experiences, where the witness seems to become haunted. And we can see that here. They literally moved houses, and the poltergeist phenomenon didn't stop, it actually intensified. Now, I would love to know if any of the other witnesses here saw what Linda claimed she saw, that the Mothman's wing was caught in a wire and it was trying to free itself. Her consistent description of it having angel wings is also of interest. I mean, all in all, though it was a traumatic experience for her, she consistently expressed the belief that the creature didn't intend to harm them and was actually afraid of them. The final sighting for her of this thing apparently shuddering in the cold is one of many encounters I've noticed where people will see some sort of anomalous phenomena. There's an excellent encounter from one of Linda Godfrey's books of people seeing, for all intents and purposes, a werewolf. So, again, these terrifying beings, which somehow impress the witness with a sense of helplessness. The witness feels sympathy, actually wants to help them. And that might be the most terrifying thing in the world to me. To think that you can be seeing something which is so out of the ordinary that just by how strange it is, we would typically respond with fear. And then often it's something which is rather frightening. Again, a werewolf like creature, this bizarre giant winged being with glowing red eyes. And somehow, even through that, normal response where we would react with fear, people are kind of impressed with this almost sympathy. Um, we'll see other, like, in my opinion, kind of impressions like that, where people suddenly think that they just, they're tired of looking at it. They just want to go to bed. It just, there is some sort of disconnect between what's being witnessed and how people are reacting. But yeah, the sympathetic response, the desire to help, that is very, very frightening to me. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the Scarberry and Mallette encounter, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat, and be sure to tune into Somewhere in the Skies every other Friday for the audio versions of Just Another Tinfoil Hat. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Do